A very good evening and welcome to the Fourth Estate. Charles Shampagi. It is the 6th of March 2016. Is a new phase of the battle for State House 2016 to 2021 just opening? We announced on this show last week, or last Sunday, that a petition would be filed during the week to take this challenge to another level. And from technical people we're listening to now, they say that it means all the contenders for the presidency in the contest for February 18th elections remain presidential candidates until the Supreme Court resolves the petition filed by John Patrick Amama Mbabazi, an independent candidate in the just concluded elections, is disposed of. From what we know now, Amama Mbabazi raised 28 grounds to justify his petition, which whose main thrust is to call for an annulment of the election. And of course, that means the quashing of the declaration of the Electoral Commission that Museveni won that election. As of this weekend, the lawyers for candidate Museveni have filed their response. They have dismissed each and every of the 28 grounds raised by Amama Mbabazi, and they say those grounds have no standing in law, and they have denied every accusation leveled against them. President Museveni, from what we understand, has set up a team of almost 60 lawyers that are going to defend him, and the Electoral Commission is the other respondent, and the third respondent for the first time, I think, in Uganda's jurisprudence regarding electoral petitions. The Attorney General has also been included on the petition by Amama Mbabazi. Amama Mbabazi has also set up a huge team of lawyers, and we're waiting to see whether the Forum for Democratic Change of candidate Kizza Besigye, who was the runner-up in the declared results, will join that petition, because that's where everybody has been looking. What we're hearing from Kasangati is that Kizza Besigye is actually threatening to announce a people's government and set up a cabinet. Tonight, to discuss that, I have a team of journalists, and just before I introduce them, let me say there is an interesting contest going on at Makerere University. 13 candidates, 13 or 12, Ivan now? 13 candidates vying for the guild presidency of Makerere University. We should have wanted to have some of those contestants come and join us on the Fourth Estate, but the number is simply too many. We can't accommodate all of you guys on the show, so maybe, and it's difficult to phase out in a contest where the election is going to be happening next week. So let me introduce, starting with at the extreme end, Onapito Ekomoloit, Corporate Affairs Director of Nile Breweries, SAB Miller, and part of the show. Ona, always a pleasure to have you here.
I'm honored to be among a bunch of young, suited lawyers to be so I'm the old man out here discussing a legal issue. You know, the closest I came to becoming a lawyer was so many years ago when I rejected all pressure to take up the law course and chose journalism. Yes. So
you're seated between journalists, actually, primarily, because none of them has joined.
But you see, I liked your introduction that all the petition arguments have been dismissed, including one about touching the hindquarters of a certain animal.
No, it's interesting, actually. Maybe we'll be discussing that statement by candidate Museveni makes it into an electoral petition. Ivan Okuda is a journalist who works with the Daily Monitor and also a law student at Makerere University. Ivan, very nice to have you.
Thank you, Charles. Good evening, Uganda.
And Angelo Izama. Angelo is on and off from the show, traveling a lot, but Angelo has done many things. He continues to do many things. Tried to be a lawyer. He's been a journalist and political consultant, political analyst, journalism consultant.
Every time I'm in a place, people introduce me however they want. I ceased to request like a particular definable biography.
Okay. We should have been joined on this show, and maybe we will actually along the way, by a senior lawyer who will help us navigate some of the legal issues. If he manages to make it into the studio, we're still expecting him. And of course, we'll be opening the phone lines at some stage for you to be able to comment. Let me start with you, Angelo. What did you make of Amama Mbabazi's 28 grounds for raising an electoral petition, conscious of the fact that he came in third with less than 150,000 votes? From what I hear from the Amama Mbabazi camp, the basis of this argument is they want to build a case on one strong basis that what happened on February 18th was not an election at all.
First of all, I congratulate Right Honorable Mbabazi on his filing of a petition. There was a moment there that it seemed like none of the parties, the presidential candidates, would have filed a petition. We would have been in a very difficult position, I think, as a country. This gives the courts, which are the other arm of government, to try and do their own pitch as to the quality of the election. Now, I have disagreed with two professors at Makerere, essentially about what this case is about. The argument is that if you look at the last two petitions, what the position the courts have taken is that all the malpractices in the electoral process were not enough to vary the outcome. Mm-hmm. In other words, regardless of what happened, that the outcome of the election would still have made the incumbent the president. The argument is that, look, the test before the courts, which is a substantiality test, is a mixture of a qualitative test, which is, have the rules been followed, mm-hmm. and a quantitative test, which is, basically about the votes. Like, how many votes did each person get? Mm. Now, the reason I disagree is because I think that the way people are reading this election is that to say that the test before the judges already is a form of rigging. That judges in Uganda are incapable of doing an annulment of an election, mm-hmm. just because it hasn't happened. I totally disagree with this, both in the law and in practice, and I have my reasons for that. Mm-hmm.
Let me just cut in there, because what I have been hearing before the petition was filed, when all the running around to put the petition together, and like you say, when people were holding their breath and waiting to see, will a petition be filed or not, people were analyzing the judges that sit on that bench.
They had concluded.
Initially, the thinking was that it's a quorum of 7 judges. It's actually going to be a quorum of 9 judges. Yeah. And people have been combing through their CVs, combing through where they came from, and wondering whether they have the
have the wherewithal.
Yes, the wherewithal to withstand the pressure that comes with an election, a petition like this.
I don't want to speak on behalf of the judges, but first of all, I want to disabuse those who are watching, because a lot of the arguments brought before the court, they confuse neutrality with independence. It is okay for judges to have political opinions and political sides. It's something entirely different for the court to be independent. And if you look back at the way, particularly candidate Kizza Besigye has been treated in the past, when his rights were wantonly violated, like he was accused of treason, the courts dismissed that. There was some fake rape case against him, the courts dismissed that. There was a time when, there was a push from the Attorney General, who is now a respondent now, for him not to be nominated. I think that was 2006 when you and I covered that election. That was quashed by the courts. The courts in Uganda have proved that they are capable of independence. Now, people who are in the other side can accuse the courts, I think they'll be wrongly doing so, partly, that the courts are not neutral. But I don't think that's a consideration for the rights of the petitioner to be handled.
Okay, let me turn to you, Honor, first, before I come to Ivan. From experience, are these fears about the court grounded?
Look, just first of all, I would like to say, from a political point of view, the petition has both strengths and weaknesses. In terms of strengths, one, this petition is riding on a cloud of an election that has been disputed, and there is a perception that this election was rigged, which seems to be holding, at least amongst those who do not support President Museveni. So the petition feeds on that. So even if people have argued that Amama Mbabazi got less than 2%, so it's the least qualified.
Least qualified, with 1.4%.
Is riding on a wave. But then at the same time, we have a history of this kind of petitions, and Ugandans are not blind to this, and they know. So I don't think people in the opposition genuinely get excited or even believe that the outcome of this petition will be different. because you can't isolate this from the history of similar petitions with the same president in charge. So much as Angel wants to have hope or to give hope to the petitioners, I think there's enough precedent to show that this is what the Americans would call a dead on arrival petition. I know that the courts or the judges are definitely very qualified. They will try to be neutral, but I also believe they are political animals, and I believe they are politically sensitive. So they will try to argue both from a point of law, but also mindful of the political atmosphere in which this petition is being brought. So I don't think the judges are going to isolate themselves from the way you think. These are human beings. They go back to their houses, they have discussions with their families and relatives. They know that this, anything other than saying that there isn't enough reason to annul the election, will not be sustainable in the current environment.
Isn't that the very the core essence of this petition? The political context in which the judges have to make their decision. When, like Ona says, the election remains disputed. Lawyers for candidate Museveni have been very excited. They think this is a case they will be able to deal with, like they have dealt with previous petitions against him. But that precedent set in 2001, 2006, that when you find, whereas the court found problems with the election generally, the substantiality test. Now, we know all of us that the substantiality test failed in a separate petition that was disposed of, or only recently raised by Kizza Besigye. Isn't it a critical moment for the bench, especially led by Bat Katurebe? Because this is going to write his history now. He is going through his new orientation with this petition, electoral petition number 001 of 2016, constitutional petition number 001 of 2016. How do they play the balance between the law and the politics?
Thank you. I think that's a very beautiful question. Essentially, this is a political matter, possibly more political than it's legal. And it's against that background I share my sympathy with the judges, because they're conducting very delicate judicial business in a situation of abnormality. What that means then is their decisions will be a mixture of both the law but also the politics. You know, you're going to be looking at compliance with the electoral laws of the country, as enshrined in Section 59 of the Presidential Elections Act, but also doing a very delicate balancing act with the politics of the day. What other options the Supreme Court has in the next less than 30 days? One is to dismiss the petition, like they did in 2006 and 2001. But of course, you have a precedent of case law in those previous petitions, but you don't have a precedent of facts. So it's possible for the Supreme Court to deviate from its earlier ruling and annul the election, for argument's sake. But this is the difficulty they find themselves in. If you dismiss the petition, which is one of the options they have under the law, you will again feed into not essentially propaganda per se, but the crisis of confidence in the judiciary on the part of the public. That means whatever allegations have been raised against the judiciary will actually hold in the eyes of the public. If you uphold the election, you find yourself in the same trap, because one of the options they have is to declare the candidate who was validly elected. The option is to annul the election, and that's where the politics now overrides the law, because I had a conversation with one of the 4 justices of the Supreme Court who, in the 2006 petition, ruled in favor of upholding the election. And one of the delicate issues on the table for them was aware of the history of the country, aware of the context in which we're operating, how tenable is another election in this context. And that politics now comes into shaping the decision of the judge. So it's really more politics than the law. Because if you annul the election and order for another election the next 20 days, under what institutional framework? Because the Electoral Commission has already been indicted in this particular petition. There is loss of confidence in the Electoral Commission. So you're going to hand the same Electoral Commission mandate to organize another election. And what chaos will erupt in that regard. It's a very delicate balancing act for them.
Angelo, the careful balancing act. How does the court deal with this? Because you have a critical political context in which you're handling this case. You have dismissed 2 previous petitions while agreeing that on the basis of facts presented before court, the petitioner had a strong case. But it only failed on a substantiality test, which is really fluid. How do you measure substantiality? Is the argument that has followed all the previous petitions. And now, especially coming in at this time, when I was joking just before we came on air that President Museveni has continued celebrating his victory, but very far away from the center because the center simply doesn't belong.
Charles,
Yes.
I have no problem with the substantiality test. I think it's sufficient in that it gives the full discretion to the judges to determine what the qualitative outcome is of the election. No one should blame any other person apart from the judges themselves in discharging that duty. And I think that the 9 justices, Ivan said, conversant of the political context within which they're operating. However, I don't think they have as much to worry about as they did when the first petition was brought. You know, when the first petition was brought in 2001, that election there was essentially a presidential election. Subsequent elections have confirmed Uganda as essentially a parliamentary system. You can argue that there is presidential capture, but if you look at the dynamic in our electoral system of elected people, politicians, you've got that dynamic largely sitting in the Parliament of Uganda. So 2006, you had a 48% of the incumbents then never came back. 2011, 68% of all incumbents never came back. I haven't seen the figures now, but I imagine that is towards the range of over 70%. Ugandan voters are able to exercise their vote with deliberate intentions at the parliamentary race. By the way, that is what I call the middle majority. And the confusion for those who are representing the petitioner, by the way, is to distinguish the parliamentary race from the presidential one. It's the same election on the same day. You cannot say
but you know they follow different dynamics.
No, I don't think they do. Because the same voters who cast their vote for the parliamentary candidate do so for the presidential candidate. Now, if your argument is that, look, I treat Charles differently from the way I treat Ivan, you know, the argument cannot be about process. Because the judges cannot, in one signature, endorse the process for parliamentary candidates, which are the majority, and disendorse it for the presidential candidate. In any case, by the way, if you are a justice of the Supreme Court and you're looking at all superintending political conditions, you have to consider that the real dynamic of the democracy in Uganda is that about the parliamentary race. And I think that the only issue then that is remaining before the judges is the quality of the presidential election. And I think that judges are able to do this, is they can resolve this by simply calling for a recount. A recount attends to the issues of the petitioner, which is only about the presidential race, which is a very scientific question of whether or not the votes for President Museveni can confirm him as the elected president.
But where does that place arguments like his offer of horse to the in West Nile, which his team has responded to today, the touching of some parts of the leopard, as Order Peter refused to say it. But let's take a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll be continuing our deep analysis into the petition. It's not yet, it's a matter before court. The arguments haven't begun, so we're treading carefully not to cross the line of sub judice. We'll be right back in a moment. Is the Supreme Court now in the dock? The court was actually working throughout this weekend because the lawyers for candidate Yoweri Museveni, who's the first respondent, filed their response to the petition by Amama Mbabazi during the weekend, dismissing all the 28 grounds that have been raised by candidate Amama Mbabazi. And while we're in the break, we've been joined by Daniel Ronald Ruhweza. He's an attorney and lecturer at law. Daniel, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Charles. I'm happy to be here.
I'd introduced the other team already, but just for viewers who might be joining us now, we have Honor Peter Ekomoloit. He's part of the show. We have Ivan Okuda, is coming back to the show for the second time, and no, not the second time actually, about the third time, I think. Yes, and Angelo Izam. Now let me just turn to you, Dr. Uwezo. You're a PhD candidate at Kent University. Yes. If I could turn to you quickly. The petitioners, Amama Mbabazi has filed a petition. One of the major debates, the context in which this petition is being had, is a highly political context. There is a precedent in 2001 petition, 2006 petition, which failed rather. I think that's the legal word, which failed largely because of the substantiality test. That question has also been dealt with in a separate petition that questioned the provision of the substantiality test.
Yes.
Now, looking at the bench of 9 judges going to hear this petition that have already been announced, what challenges stand in their way?
I think the judges probably have the public opinion as their biggest challenge. I personally do not think they are going to have any difficulty in coming to a conclusion. They will use the exact test that the panel before them have used. They will consider the evidence that will be presented to find out whether or not the grounds that have been alleged have been proven. If they are able to do that, then they will go to stage 2, which really, in my view, is quite subjective. And that is where you can never know. It's neither here nor there. We can speculate that they may decide in a certain way, but we can't tell. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest pressure on them is what does the public think? Because, you know, for a while now, one of the main petitioners for presidential petitions now, Dr. Besigye, has shown reluctance to appear before the court on the grounds that they are not going to do anything different. So are they going to do something different this time or not is up to them. But I do not think they will have difficulty in arriving at a decision.
The long shopping list of candidate Amama Mbabazi, 28 grounds is quite a long shopping list that he has presented. Is that in an effort, would you think, to also try and prove that there were so many violations of electoral laws?
Well, Charles, I think first of all, we need to agree that every individual who feels aggrieved or who feels that something has gone or amiss has the right to do what candidate Amama Mbabazi has done. And if he is able, because you see, the question is, can you prove what you allege? But also, can you show that what happened was so substantial that it affected the final vote? All right. So I think that is the reason why candidate Amama Mbabazi has to go the whole 9 yards to be able to show the court that, you know, we had these issues happening, and indeed there were so many issues that had happened. And hopefully that will convince the court that, you know, we need to have the remedies that he is asking for.
Because
I'm trying to be very careful not to
argue the substance of the petition.
The substance of the petition.
Angelo, if you do this discussion on the streets of Kampala or any town in this country today, people are looking to where and how candidate Kizza Besigye behaves. One is, there is of course, the jury is out there on the conduct of the police in the last, how many days since the election? Since 18th, on restricting his movements. And therefore, the card that the FDC has been playing and saying, we would have wanted, maybe would have considered other options, but the police simply made it impossible or difficult for us to file a petition. I understand also that possibly candidate Amama Mbabazi and his legal team are thinking or relying on hope that Kizza Besigye and the FDC could join them in that petition. Do you see a possibility that FDC could ask to be joined on that petition? And what does the law say about that?
I don't think, well, they could file, I'm sure the law professor would explain the kind of technical route to the petition. I don't think it's in the interest of FDC to join this petition. I think that Dr. Besigye has got in his corner what you know, the law professor is calling public opinion, and it would really be his own. He would lose by subjecting that public opinion to some kind of verdict by a court of law, especially where that court has twice spanned his own efforts. This is nothing to say anything about the actual legal case. The legal case, I think, must be considered on its merits outside of the political games. But if you ask me, I don't think it's in the interest of Dr. Besigye, who someone described as the people's president, you know, and the other president, one of Peter's former boss, is the president of the state. Yeah. So why would he, you know, subject that valuable public opinion, which here, especially in the metropolitan area, the prevailing wisdom is that he won this election. Why would he subject it to a court?
Yes, Ivan.
Yes. You see, the biggest beneficiary of this petition is actually candidate Yoweri Museveni, because it, in effect, if the Supreme Court upholds the election and dismisses the petition for that matter, that in essence validates the victory of Museveni, as happened in 2006 and 2001. So if you're Museveni or part of his team, you're actually praying so hard, somebody goes to court and the matter is put to rest. Because Dr. Besigye is now calling for an independent audit of the results. But once the Supreme Court has decided on the matter, and to the fact that, well, we had irregularities, but they didn't have a substantial effect on the outcome of the vote, that, I mean, Museveni needs no better validation of his victory than the Supreme Court ruling.
Where does that place candidate Kizza Besigye?
Well, it's going to be a continuous struggle for him. He's been in the trenches for 15 years. If you look at the time he left NRM, 30 years from the time he joined the struggle in the bush. So it's going to be a continuous struggle for him. I don't see the option of the independent audit taking place in time soon. Possibly we'll give in to the talks that are being initiated by the Women's Situation Room, the Elders Forum, and the Religious Council of Uganda. And where that takes us is another discussion.
Look,
yeah,
what are Besigye's chances? What does he do? How does he
not
behave?
Besigye's chances. First of all, who benefits? To me, for both Yoweri Museveni and Amama Mbabazi, this is really a double-edged sword. For the president, yes, it brings this sort of standoff to an end, and then the swearing in goes ahead smoothly. But at the same time, the arguments, the allegations that will be brought up will add up to sort of the pile of discrediting the victory, which I believe should be part of Amama Mbabazi's game plan to make sure that if 2021 is going to be another contest, at least the waters should be muddied enough to make sure that the president wobbles towards 2021 and maybe 2021 he struggles, or in the best case scenario for him and others, Yoweri Museveni is out of the way, and so the whole NRM system will have been so discredited that the opposition really has a free ride. So it's a give and take for both players, and I really believe the main purpose of the petition is to make sure, especially the issue of removing age limit becomes perhaps a bit harder for the president, because he will really be a wounded buffalo, so to say. So he will get it out of the way.
You never want to meet a wounded buffalo. he talks about fingering some other dangerous
smaller animals.
So,
but for Kizza Besigye, yes, this again, of course, again, on the one hand, it will be used against him to say, so why didn't he go to court? Amama Mbabazi at least went to court, so he has no arguments to make. You know, if he was even the one who was much closer to victory, he should have gone to court. So his critics will make that argument on the NRM part. So I think he has to position for 2021. His best bet is to make sure the waters get muddied, as I've already argued, such that 2021 becomes perhaps a clearer picture for him.
Yes, Angela.
Let me bring this issue back to the matters of law and politics that the court will consider. Look, I think the problem with the last two petitions is that they thought that the opinion of the judges would be limited to who was essentially the one who won the election. But like I said, judges have a lot more riding on when it comes to the quality of that election and the political circumstances that go into it. One of their worries is, people have expressed this, that if the courts call for an annulment, that there would be chaos. First of all, I don't think that's a far-fetched worry, in my view. One, because the government will not cease to exist because a petitioner or his opponent has been declared not the actual winner. Their procedures for how the government will continue.
Angela, I think there may be no chaos everywhere else, but in the court itself, there will be chaos for the court.
Maybe, but let me make
I think the major argument has been the fear. What people say is what Kizza Besigye, for example, has called the impotence of the court when it comes to critical political matters, is the fear that if you upset the status quo, the political order, you have chaos in the country.
And there is a lot of legal scholarly work about this position of the courts, that the courts do not want to cancel the political order because they draw their power from that order, and if you eliminate it, then everything else ceases. I think that is a far-fetched position because, first of all, courts have actually never annulled that election in Uganda. So it's going to be a first if they do. Secondly, I think that the mistake people make is to think that the courts must only reason for the petitioners. It's wrong. Take this election. How many people voted, Ibram?
10 million?
About 10 million?
And what is the population of Uganda?
35?
Maybe moving towards 40 million. Who speaks for the actual majority? The court has to take it upon itself, to come to a decision that reflects the interest of the majority. And my argument is the majority is not those who voted. So the courts really, what they need to attend to is the process, which is why a recount makes the most sense. And no one is saying recount is impossible.
Yes, but I think the major argument is not only on the recount, because if you look at the grounds that have been raised by candidate Amama Mbabazi, the flaws in the election stretch far beyond the actual voting day. And if you're looking at the numbers, you're looking at 15.2 million people that the Electoral Commission says are on the register. You're looking at possibly, 15.2 million, 18 million Ugandans who are adults, and then the others are younger people. So the adults are deciding for the younger people. And you're going to look at the over 5 million that didn't even turn up to vote. You're looking at the 500,000 whose votes were invalidated or invalidated their votes, either by default or by design. You're looking at the 3.5 million that voted for candidate Kizza Besigye and close to 4 million overall that voted for the opposition against candidate Museveni. And you're looking at the 5.9 million voters who voted for candidate Museveni as the things stand today. How do you create that perfect balance to be able to address the concerns of those people? And Dr. Reza, if you could put just another question to you. That, I think you, the lawyers, call it the Kelsenian theory. Yes. How does it fit into a political context like now? Because it's not a given that the population belongs to one side. There is almost an even split within the population.
Okay, Charles, I think, first of all, the assumption you've made is based on the fact that what the Electoral Commission declared has been adjudged as so. Right? That is what is being contested right now. So until the court makes a declaration, we are not yet at a position where we can say, indeed, the court has made a finding that the voters who were alleged to have been counted as having voted for Dr. Besigye, Amama, and so on, are the true record. I think that's one of the reasons why we are going to court. So
I think we said at the beginning of, at the start of the show, I think I was responding to Angelo, that the Amama team is going into this election with a view or trying to sell a position that what happened on February 18th was not even an election at all. It was something different. So you can go ahead with your
argument. So that's why the court has to make this, to make that finding. But regarding the Kelsenian theory, the idea behind Kelsen is that if there is a successful revolution, all right, then the new status quo, the new position replaces the status quo and is given legal validity. This was adopted in the case of Experte Matovu, having come from another Pakistani case. But it was also overruled in Pakistan. you know, with, I think, Asma Gilani's case. So this means that the Kelsenian theory that we relied on in ex parte matter of 1966, in essence, is of no legal...
Can you help our non-legal viewers?
Okay. So this is what happened.
Let me attempt to explain it. Let me attempt to explain it. You fund sports, right?
Yes.
So basically, what they...
Let me try the legal thing, then you can come in. So this is what happened on Apito. In 1966, you had a case called Uganda versus ex parte, Commissioner of Prisons ex parte Matovu. And among the many things that were being argued is the current, the situation at the time whereby Dr. Apolomito Nobote had overthrown the existing, the legal order at the time, where you had President Mutesa, Obote as the Prime Minister, and so on and so forth. Now the question was that valid? Okay? And the arguments that were made were to the effect that indeed, because there was a successful revolution in a different case that happened in Pakistan, that finding relied on Professor Kelsenian's theory. I forget what the right word is.
Legal positivism.
Yes, of legal positivism. That could be then used as a precedent to apply to the Ugandan situation. And on that basis, Justice Udo Udoma, who was a Ghanaian judge, said what happened in Uganda was legally binding. It was a valid change of the
order had changed.
The order had changed.
I am not
Thank
sure
you for the explanation. You call this 101.
So I don't know if that makes sense. However,
the consultants can continue later.
Yes.
But Angela, if you
but I think it is important that
to?
owner gets to know
Yes.
that later on, that very decision that we relied on in 1966 was overruled.
Let me attempt it this way. Let me just attempt it this way, Honor, and for our viewers out there, that what Daniel Ruweza is telling us is what happened on February 18th. The Kelsenian theory works in such a way that what happened on February 18th might have been a flawed process, but it has produced a result which is holding at the moment. And the moment, and for as long as that result is holding at the moment, a new legal order has been established. And therefore, if you upset it and try to go back, Angelo is shaking his head. If you attempt to upset that, if you attempt to upset that to go back to where it was, then you might have some chaos. So you maintain what it is. Is that close to what's supposed to be?
Let us go back to the
politics.
Now, to the politics, you can understand if the young lawyers here can disagree how somebody who has other powers will interpret an ediction from the court. They will say these courts are just corrupt and what are they saying? People decided.
Someone asked me whether or not the ordinary person understands even what's going on in the courts. But the simple and direct answer to the way Kelsenian is interpreted is, with the case of Matovu, is Matovu argued that he couldn't, a judgment couldn't be passed either in his favor or not in the 60s because the constitution that was at the time had been overthrown. And the court said no, yes, Obote may have overthrown the constitution, but the new constitution is the new legal order, and that is how things stand. So the fear of the judges really, since actually people like Professor Joe Oloko Onyango have argued, is that the judges in Uganda consider that legal power comes from the pre-existing political order. And if in an election you announce that the election is overturned, that you create conditions for another political order under which new things will what? Basically, you change the status quo. And I agree with him that this doesn't seem to be, shouldn't be holding. And I wanted to just make 2 points about it, which is A, that in fact Uganda's political system has been evolving, and Uganda's democracy itself holds, especially at a parliamentary level. Secondly, I think that the judges should not fear Kelsenian at all, because even if you annul an election, which I don't think they will do, they can call for a recount, that's a different thing. Even if you did go ahead the government itself would continue to exist. I don't think that we are in the kind of situation we were in the 60s. And the final point I wanted to make... The final point I wanted to make is that, look, like you said at the beginning, Onapito, judges are part of our society, right? In other words, they're not only thinking for the politicians and the candidates, they're not even thinking about the partisan police that we have, the corrupt civil service that we have. They have to weigh the interests of the entire country against our political history. Now, if you take all the matters of this, and you, if you appoint a judge, and you go Justice Mangosha, okay? Yes. You have to ask yourself, who are the majority? And my argument is that the majority are those who did not vote. The hopes of that majority must rest, okay?
The bigger question, Angelo, is who holds the political power?
Yes.
And what is the political impact of a decision I make? I think that's where
let's be about the bush. I can even anticipate what would happen in this town with any ruling saying the election has been annulled, there should be the recount or re-election. I can assure you Parliament will be convened, there will be some decisions to say this is interfering with the power of the people. Yes. The courts can go to hell, I'm sure.
I doubt anything like that.
Well, gentlemen, this is a matter before court, so we need to treat very carefully on how much we can
I doubt, first of all, the Parliament would not have been constituted.
Can we take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we'll continue to discuss these issues. We'll be right back. It's not the politics, but the law has taken center stage in this discussion in the context of who becomes, or who will be Uganda's president effective 12th May to 2016 to 2021, another 12th May 2021, when a new government will be hopefully put in, established. And there's a lot of running behind the scenes, people trying to broker peace. I hear a lot of people trying to talk about dialogue and how the different people can engage. The women's situation room that Angelo talked about has been to Kizza Besigye's home. They have been to President Museveni. They have been to Amama Mbabazi, former presidential candidate still, given that this election is still being contested. Benon Buta Biraro has also been shuttling around trying to broker peace. And I hear lots of people talking about another, what would you call a third intervention in this election. Telephone lines are open. If you can call us, the number is on your screen. Call us and make your contribution. Let's share your contribution on this contest, and we'll be assessing in the next few minutes what is going to be the different roles of the different players in this election before the court makes its final decision, and how that will impact the final outcome. Let me start with you, Daniel Ruhweza, before I get a caller. How do you see this playing out? Because Besigye has chosen a path, which is one, he's threatened to, or he's announced, he will announce a people's government. What that means, I do not know. The police has insisted to withdraw from his home in the first place in Kasangati, and to reduce the siege around, or the following, the restrictions on Kizza Besigye. He must denounce his call for defiance. And people are reading a lot from, for the court petition, people are reading from 2001, 2006, and the decision by Kizza Besigye not to go to court in 2011.
Yes.
For Besigye's call for defiance, people are reading from what happened after the 2011 elections, which was the walk-to-work protests.
Yes.
And of course his pledge for defiance. How do the different players fit into this? You think Biraro's sort of diplomacy is going to make any meaning, and the women's situation among the others?
I think in addition to what Biraro is doing, you've had the international community has also been involved in this whole shuttle diplomacy. I do not know how it is going to end up, right? But I am one of those who thinks that having a conversation is very important. And I've discussed this with some of my friends. Some of them have even laughed at me, say that, you know, who is going to have such a conversation at all? But I think it's important for us to have a conversation with or without the petition. Because if, for example, if the petition reinstates the current status quo, we'll still need to have a discussion, because like it or not, Kizza Besigye
what will
remains...
be the subject of that discussion?
I think the subject of the discussion is some of the issues that happened during the election, okay? comments that were made by the Electoral Commission, the EC chairperson. Even the question of defiance itself, is it wrong for someone to talk about defiance in the current constitutional order? That's, I think, a discussion we need to have. The role of the police going forward, the role of the Electoral Commission, must we have electoral reforms? How are they going to happen? The question of the central stage that the NRM party is taking in the governance of the... I think there are all these governance questions that we need to talk about. But we also need to unpack the question of whether or not Uganda is a state as we understand states to be.
Okay.
Things like that. We have a lot to talk about as a nation.
I think Studio will allow me when we have a caller, but yes, Ivan. What kind of discussion?
To deviate from Dr. Ruheza, I think the discussion we need to have is post-Museveni Uganda. And Museveni must be part of that equation. It is an illusion to imagine Museveni, you can have a discussion about Uganda after Museveni and keep Museveni out of that conversation. Why? Because the biggest impediment to any democratic process in this country right now is General Museveni.
I thought General Museveni was just elected in a democratic election, which has been contested.
Which has been contested.
Yes. And has been re-elected for the last how many times?
Yes, but you see, to the extent that his presidency project still holds, and the effect of that on institutions like the Electoral Commission, the police force, and other security agencies, the National Treasury, the Parliament, and all these other things, we shall still find ourselves moving around in circles. You'll have another election petition in 2021. We shall have this kind of conversation again, so long as we do not have a discussion on the kind of discussion that the Kenyans had with Moi in 1997 to say we're going to have multi-party elections, but strictly 2002, your time is up, and please go home. We thank you, and you'll be safe.
The current constitutional order means that President Museveni is not qualified to contest for election in 2021. But the biggest debate happening out there, even before the 10th Parliament is sworn in, is what will be the package of constitutional reforms and constitutional reforms.
Yes.
Well, what will be the question, the place of term of age limit rather? Let's pick a call on line and then I'll come to you on. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yes, hello.
Yes, your name and where you're calling from. Keep your question or comment brief.
This is Robert from Uganda.
Yes, please.
Yes,
Go ahead.
This is Robert from Uganda.
Yes, Mbabazi.
Yes, my concern is there is a polling station according to the information from the document from the Electoral Commission. Some polling station has 275 voters. The other candidate has 779 votes. Now,
Yes.
how can you call that one an elected reason?
Yes, Mr. Tumwebaze, there is a petition before court, and I think that will come as part of the evidence. It's a matter that will have to be argued in court, I think. Then, do you have another call on the line? Yes, please.
Hello?
Yes, please. Your name and where you're calling from. Keep your question or comment brief.
I'm calling from this is Swale.
Yes, Swale.
Yes, sir.
You are calling from?
Hello?
You're calling from where?
I'm calling from Zambia.
From Zambia. Keep your question or comment brief.
My comment is,
Hello? Are you thinking about your question? Yes.
I'm calling from Zambia.
Yes, go ahead.
Zambia Kevin.
Yes.
Yes, into the way government has been doing these things from 2006 and the rest of court cases that have been there. I don't think whether there is a fair hearing in the court. It seems to happen the same like it was in 2006, and they will tell you that things were there, but the date was not enough to repeat, to do the elections come again. So we don't see anything good from court.
Okay, thank you. That's your opinion. We'll have to wait and see how the court decides. Do you have another call online? Hello? Hello? Hello?
How are you, sir?
Good, good. How are you doing, sir?
I'm calling Mokono.
Yes, please. You said your name is?
I'm calling Mokono.
Yes, please.
all these states are talking about going to court. First of all, the state is appointed by the chairman is appointed by the president. All these states are going to just wasting money. What Ghana do is the petition, wait for the to come out. I don't think this is a pretend case. What the things do, they will come out, money don't have anything like.
Okay, I'll have the panel respond to that. You said this is a predetermined case, and the outcome is pretty much predictable.
Charles, can I make a comment
just
on...
a moment. Can we pick one call and then... can we pick another caller? Yes, hello? Yes.
Yes, one more.
Yes, please.
This Innocent Province District.
Yes, Innocent.
How are you, sir?
Good, how are you? Keep your question or comment brief.
Thanks for the program.
You're welcome.
Here we're seeing what was it for?
Yes?
Is this that is right? Only time will tell.
Only time will tell.
The chance to say. But just putting forward that.
Okay, thank you. Gentlemen, we need to bring the discussion back into studio because we don't have a lot of time. Angela, you wanted to...
Yeah, I want to bring to... first of all, people should let the judges situate the court in our balance of whatever separation of powers in the best way that they can. The law does not limit them. Public morality does not limit them. Let them discharge that duty. But I wanted to make a comment about the issue you raised about this other third option.
Yeah.
So in 2013, I gave a lecture which said, don't hold an election in 2016. And my argument was quite simple. First of all, by the way, these proposals by Benon Biraro and others had been mooted by Kano Besigye and others, and I disagree with them. They were talking about a national conference, same thing. Post that, they were thinking of a government of national unity. Our legal system, past the post, does not allow for that to take legal effect. What I proposed was elect a constituent assembly. You can address those things. Because what the public is not, and I find Ugandans very dishonest. Here we are comfortable dismissing the role of the judges because we think that the military in Uganda behind Museveni is a formidable force. But we don't want to come out and say it right open. Secondly, by the way, I think that the military is an important, is an important part of our society and an important part of the political consensus. You know, that even if you've got, look, all the front runners were former members of the High Command. You know, we have to dispel with that fiction before we move forward. And the way you do that, by the way, is to I even designed like a 3-tier process. One, elect a CA. I disagree with the size of the government and the size of the political class. CA can address that. You can deal with questions of whether what Ivan was talking about, you know, how do you deal with President Museveni in person? There are legal precedents in countries like ours, particularly in Chile, where, for example, immunity was extended to someone with the status of Museveni. The parliament can do that. But the most important thing for Uganda is to deal with the elephant in the room, which is the relationship between civilians and the military. You need to create a pathway for the military to leave civilian matters to civilians. And you cannot do that simply by having political agreement by people who are former soldiers. You must have the Ugandans weigh in through an elected CA to say, look, this is our path for the military to leave the question of politics finally to civilians. And that is a military to civilian transition, which is not the issue at stake in our election today.
I think the bigger debate, with the bigger question, in my view, from all the attempts to see how do we move beyond this election and how do we move maybe beyond Yoweri Museveni, at the heart of the matter is why are people going into politics, either supporting Yoweri Museveni or opposing him? The key element is the state or politics has become one of the major sources of earning. And there is contestation for power as a means to accessing resources. And this winner take it all, which we are pursuing right now, in a poor country, in a situation where most of the political contestants are also not just expressing ideas for changing society, but also hoping to enhance their livelihoods, it's not tenable. So you need to create a system whereby everyone has some, it's not really power sharing per se, they may not have to be in the cabinet, but you need to create an opposition that is also part of government.
Let's place this in some broader context.
Yes.
If you look at negotiated settlements, the experiences of countries like Zimbabwe, Morgan Tsvangirai and Robert Mugabe, Kenya, Mwai Kibaki and Raila
No, I'm
Odinga.
not going there.
What did it
I'm not
achieve?
going there.
Yes,
I don't want these settlements after elections. I want settlements which are in the constitution. For example, I now believe there is a case for an election which is between parties, and you don't have, for example, parliamentary contest, and it is the parties to allocate seats. Because imagine, for example, the situation in FDC now. All the top guys in the FDC who are really in the trenches are out in the cold. But they have some small people, I'm sorry to call them so, who have one parliamentary seat, and they have some level of comfort. But the guys who really fought for the 35% have no role in government whatsoever. That's why you should be drawing some of the members of parliament, should be drawn from the key players in the opposition parties.
Can we place this into a context we are all part of and familiar with, which is the Ugandan context? The people in government today and supporters of the NRM, and especially players in security, are working so hard and hoping that the apparent come with restrictions on Kizza Besigye continue and everybody can forget and go back to normal life. They're beginning to sell the story of the economy is bigger than the politics. We should consider what our livelihoods are. In the Ugandan context, if you're going to hold a negotiation, who are you going to negotiate with? Who are the real power brokers? Who are those people that Ugandans can listen to?
Charles, I think whether we want it or not, Besigye, and this is what I wanted to say, Besigye remains someone who you cannot ignore in this current situation. And if you need to have a conversation, you must involve him in that conversation. As to whether he finally concedes or not, that can only happen if a conversation is held. The option is to ignore him and pretend that it is business as usual. All right? So that answer...
What would be the consequence of that?
Well, we can only speculate, but I think that the state has as much power as you can imagine to continue maintaining the siege that they have put around his home. And hopefully the decision from the courts of law regarding that specific issue will help placate the situation right now. But still, that does not go down to the main issue, which I think this panel clearly is identifying, that we need to have a conversation that deals with what Onapito is saying, what Ivan is saying, what my brother Izama is saying, what I am saying, that there are so many issues in this nation that need a forum for discussion. Okay. We need to give people an opportunity to air them out. I mean, we can concentrate on Besigye alone, but once Besigye is out of the picture, it does not mean that we have dealt with the underlying issues.
Oh, once Yoweri Museveni is out of the picture, yes, we shall still have this problem.
I think that's where the crisis... Yes, you beg to disagree if I put my opinion.
Because at the heart of all this is Musevenism, and not just Museveni the individual, because we're discussing a man who has become a system. When he appeared at the Capital Gang, Samdungana told him he's become a project. And because if you're discussing how independent the judges can be, you're still going to discuss that in the realm of how much the Museveni system can wield its influence.
How identify them, how has he moved them, how can he influence them.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's a discussion really on how do you rid the country of this Museveni system that has made it almost impossible for the judiciary to function, for the parliament to function. I mean, brought the country to near paralysis. The words were best captured by the US president, that there is a situation of fear of the unknown, fear of death, fear of arrests, fear of tear gas, fear of violence. Because all this feeds into protecting system Museveni.
Okay.
But also I said this election.
That's why I disagree.
Hold it a minute, gentlemen.
That,
Let's just expand the context a little bit. After the presidential election, there was no much problem across the country. After the local council 5 elections, a few days later, there was violence in Bundibujo that left 9 people dead. The newsroom here at NTV has been reporting a story of another incident in Kapchorwa last night in which a police station was attacked and some people killed. Now, the discussion I am hearing is, one is the fear, aren't we going to end up somewhere in 2001 where activities like this, whether orchestrated by the state behind the scenes or not, get used to add restrictions on the opposition or blame them on the opposition and say, you see, these guys talked about defiance, now they're beginning to make their plans, like we saw before. The other question is, what has been the role played, where is the place of institutions like the church that previously were key players, cultural institutions, people are looking for key opinion leaders, where do they exist in this whole discussion about?
But Charles,
let me just say.
I just wanted first to answer Ivan. The idea of Musevenism has positives and negatives. And I've argued that this election, for example, the people who voted for him, one may argue are not the majority, but officially they are the majority, who are voting for the certainty that Musevenism comes with. Those who voted against him voted against the inefficiency of Musevenism. So you need to strike a balance within certainty, between certainty and creating efficiency.
And I want to agree.
You want to agree with him?
With Onapito on this, because I don't think that systems can be reduced to one person, and that when you do that, it's just a narrative about how you see the system. Look, they are almost the Ugandan political class is almost 2 million people.
If you'll indulge me for a minute, you wrote an article in 2006 and said Museveni will be a weaker president despite his victory. Yes, his Kisanja.
Yeah.
Now, how do you divorce the views you espoused in that article with what you're saying now, that the system is beyond?
Yeah, by the way, the argument I wanted to make then was that, first, because I voted against the return of parties. Secondly, because I think that the president thought it was clever to leave the movement as a system and to go into parties that he can control. And my argument was that the social, economic, and political forces that he had unleashed would not be something he can control. And I am vindicated, Charles. Look, every other year we have got the expansion of districts. Our political class today is one of the biggest in the world.
Yes, about 2.15
It's the most expensive.
million.
It's one of the most expensive in the world. And like Onapito said, politics is the main employer. We have got almost 2 million people directly involved in politics. This doesn't help you and I, who argue about the delivery of services. But the reason why I wanted to disagree with the system and the man is, look, even if you're thinking about, like Onapito is saying, design a system where there is power has to be rebalanced. Me and others have been talking to our friends both in the government and in the opposition that, look, we can even abolish the adult suffrage for president and allow parties to choose
the president.
Who the president is.
You have a parliamentary system.
Yeah, any system, because Botswana has got one. And we recently actually proposed it to Rwanda, where Kagame decided the presidential system is better for him. I think he's making a mistake. Look, all of these things are possible, but you have to get the politicians to understand that this corrupt system, where everyone thinks that they can get what they want, is unsustainable, like Ona says, and get them to a point where the legal reference for change is what we did in the 90s, which is to elect a CA to reorganize the state. I do not think that the proposals being made by Besigye and others, or those who are around the president who think that Besigye must be accommodated, will have legal effect. I am with Daniel here in saying that you cannot ignore Besigye. Those who are the cheerleaders of Besigye are the very ones who are jailing him. They know it, that you're turning the man into a martyr. He's going to be above the political system itself. He can become like, what's her name, in Burma.
Aung San Suu Kyi.
You know, it only benefits the security system where, you know, there is a system where profits are driven by paranoia. That is a fact. If the president and the people around him want to see sense the way that we see it, it is to come to a point where the system has to be redesigned.
Okay. President Museveni, Daniel, said that he is ready for negotiation. That's what he told Benon Biraro. He said he is ready for discussions, but he is not ready for a discussion on power sharing.
There is no formula for it, Charles. Let me ask you, Daniel.
Yeah.
Where is the legal formula for power sharing?
No, the answer to that, Angelo, is that laws are not cast in stone. That it is possible for us to revisit the very legal system that we are talking about.
But there has to be a process.
But right now, it is true, we do not have it. Okay?
Whether you're talking about a president who invented the so-called broad base.
Yes.
And he has taken it to a limit. Now everyone has a piece of the pie.
But I think the important thing here to deal with is the politics will shape the legal.
Yes, the law always plays catch-up. All right? The law always plays catch-up. Whether we want it or not, there are things that are going to happen. For example, as a result of this petition, okay, either due to the ruling or the points that will be made by the judges, which will influence to a certain degree what people will then do with our legal system. But at the same time, you have a new parliament with new ideas, and they will continue having journalists and advocacy groups that will continue pushing, for example, for electoral reforms. They'll continue pushing for certain things to change, okay? So the politics, Angelo, always leads the way, and then the law plays catch up. Now, if the president has said that he's not ready to share power, I mean, that is his view, okay? But what is the view of Ugandans? And how are we going to catch?
They voted for him to express that view.
No. The Ugandans are not united on this. You see, so the Ugandans need to be coalesced into some form of discussion to find out what are their views on where we are going from now. I agree with you that it is not just about Museveni. It's about us, because there are so many things that we Ugandans are doing in spite of the fact that Museveni is in power. And when he even finally leaves, we shall continue doing them. They are not good for our nation. Okay, we shall have to have that discussion. For example, the president says it is first what, then who. Then there are those people who are saying it is first who, then what.
Because the who determines the what.
Yes, so there is that discussion that is there that we must.
I've been reading Museveni's new edition of the Sowing the Mustard Seed, and he says he advised, when he got into power, he found Mwalimu was leaving, and this book he tries to present Mwalimu Nyerere as his mentor, his political mentor, and he says he was disappointed that Mwalimu was leaving because that would slow down the process of the East African Federation, and he advised Mwalimu to stay on. I found that very interesting to place the current debate about term limits and the whole discussion of President Museveni.
Does CCM have a record of this conversation?
And his presidential project, I don't know, we need to check actually. He says he repeats it I think about 2 or 3 times, and he says he wanted Mwalimu to stay, and Mwalimu told him, you will deal with this with Wenzako, your friends. We have friends here in the CCM, they'll help continue that discussion. And when I found him placing that strongly, I felt, okay, this is what he's trying to do to tell to us, this whole thing of presidential term limits falls within some context. But Ivan, let me come back to you. Who is supposed to be part of this discussion? How do they get into the discussion? Because there's been a lot of disintegration of the society. Previous power centers have retreated to the background. New power centers are not emerging. And now you have a discussion, you're saying, who actually does this discussion? The FDC has been scattered since the election, because immediately after the election, their headquarters were raided, and a lot of their big people, like Ona said, had been thrown on the website by the voters, and they have been struggling to hold together. They don't have their candidate, they don't have their party headquarters to operate from. Who do you hold this discussion with?
I think part of the challenge is the discussion gets caught up in the big man syndrome. It's usually the key politicians in FDC, it's the key politicians in NRM, it's the big men with the cassocks, if you're talking about religious institutions that are involved in the mainstream discussions. And for some reason, almost the 90% of the population, which is the ordinary man and woman, is left out of the conversation. how you then bring them on board is to start a new conversation on building consensus. And I think the fact that General Museveni has accepted to have a conversation with Dr. Kizza Besigye, who has also accepted to have a conversation, and all these major political actors, if we can be able to, come together using the different umbrellas, if it's religion, you have
should Pope Francis mediate?
if that's what it will take, then you have the Elders Forum, you have all these other institutions representing the people of Uganda in that consensus building process. Because I think it's more important if, for example, we can reach a consensus and say, Mr. President, you'll be safe, you'll enjoy this level of immunity, so long as the age limit is left intact. Because if you don't tackle the question of the age limit, which I think for me, again, is an extension of Musevenism, that you'll still have an electoral commission having challenges of confidence on the part of participants in the process. You'll have a police force and security apparatus that is tied to Museveni and the incumbency and all these other challenges. And then you have a repeat of all these conversations we're having around the table. And it's not just Uganda. If you go to Zimbabwe, that's what the conversation they're having about Robert Mugabe.
Robert Mugabe said he wants to live up to 100.
Yes.
And he celebrated 92 years the other day.
Under Kagame, the same with Congo Brazzaville under Denis Sassou Nguesso, the same with Angola, the same with Equatorial Guinea. The African big man
syndrome.
Yes, syndrome.
Honor, let me come back to you on this. You said on this show, I think last Sunday, that the next few days and the next 5 years will be determined pretty much by what President Museveni says as part of what happens. The agenda will be set by how he reacts to the question of the age limit after if he gets sworn in, depending on how the result of the petition will go. Now, the second thing you have said on this show before is the question of President Museveni, or now, Yoweri Museveni, setting himself above the fray and then putting everyone else on a level below him, and where the fight actually has largely been. But if you look at even the results of this last election, contested as they are, they set a new order. There's a growing number of Ugandans that are telling Yoweri Museveni in his face and his party that we do not believe in you. And the question of stability that you talked about, they're telling him and saying, no, look, we think other things. If you look at the sweep of the opposition in Kampala, in the elections that followed, his defeat in Kampala, and the expansion of the opposition map across the country is something you can't ignore.
Well, I believe the people in Kampala daily too are most alert to what matters, which is really the bread and butter issues, are telling the president we do not believe in the ability to run an efficient economy. And the majority, especially countryside people, say we believe in the ability to ensure that life continues in our poverty, if it is, but life continues. So the president does not want to share power, and I believe he does not want to share power to govern, political and military power. But the question of the power to administer a functioning economy and government is where maybe the discussion should be. Can that power be shared? And the other power, which he has got from the people and partly from Luero, maybe does not have to be shared. But this power to create an efficient government, which he agrees with many people constantly that is not working, is where the discussion to me should be.
Gentlemen, our time is out. We need to get out of here. Okay, if you could just have the last word, maybe.
For Honor, that let's not be, let's not assume that the people in the township are homogeneous in what they think. At the same time, let's don't think that the people in the rural areas are also homogeneous in what they think. There are different reasons why people vote Museveni and not Besigye, and vice versa. You may find that the very reasons that the people in the rural areas are voting for Museveni are the same reasons that people in the townships have. So it is not a given that everyone is clear cut and you can and that you can group them. I think one of the groups that we have not engaged with in detail, I don't know how much research you've done, Angelo, but the research I've done is, you know, when you ask the people in the rural areas, their view of governance is completely different, okay? there is a disconnect between what people do and the state, all right? And the police and the court system and so on. There is that disconnect, and maybe that's why we need to have that conversation and maybe begin to unpack these ideas. I know it sounds academic, but we probably need to have that engagement to start asking these vital questions. Why did you vote for Museveni this time round? If you are the same people that are complaining of health service misdeliveries, you're complaining about lack of jobs and opportunities, but you're still voting for President Museveni. I think that is a conversation that we need to...
They are voting for certainty, not efficiency.
But we cannot say so until we have done that.
Yes, and I think the question that will be put, which I want to put to Angela as we end this show, is voting for certainty. What the NRM has sold in the last several elections is we guarantee you peace. And you will find that if someone does an analysis of the votes as we have them today, you'll find that the urban areas where the economy is more attuned to the people vote against the establishment. Among the middle upper class, they tend to vote or to disagree with the establishment. So poorer people are voting with the NRM and stability questions. Is that sustainable?
I feel this is a burden of those of us who are in our 40s and we are looking at the next 20 years and wondering when we retire, what state of the country will be in. Look, I think President Museveni had sought to make history, but history just caught up with him. It was a mistake to return parties and impose such an expensive and inefficient system on Ugandans subsequently. And this, the tradition, the reason why the national resistance movement, the reason they existed, the imposition of peace in the country, now has come basically undone. Why? And I disagree with his view that there is a difference between rural and urban voters, because the same Museveni, I remember, used to say that class contestation was something that was far off in Africa. Well, class contestation has come home to roost. Here in the city, in the urban areas, where an income determines your life, those people have rejected the current system because it's expensive and inefficient. It is going to spread to other parts of the country subsequently. We have seen the rural-urban migration is not something that's going to be reversible. What is holding this system cannot be the distribution of rents by the NRM. It has to be the creation of real opportunities. In other words, Charles, peace, by the way, has been rejected by the urban areas. They have already said this is not enough anymore. And NRM has to think very carefully and reflect on what Onapito has said, which is how do you, if not within the system, outside of it, deal with managing the business of creating jobs and putting Uganda to work. We live in a country which deals with one major contradiction, which is in Africa. We have the most problems, we have the youngest labor force, and yet we have got a largely unemployed labor force at the same time.
Ivan, the challenges of young people in this country, the youth, whether they're in urban areas or in rural areas, tend to be the same. The cities are expanding, or urban areas are growing in terms of population. Slums are growing, largely because young people are running out of the villages. Those who get out of tertiary institutions do not find attraction going back to the village. They stay in urban areas. Those who drop out of school are running to urban areas to find some way of living. And there's a question of unemployment. There is a question of what some people have called the youth dividend and how it can be tapped into. Others have looked at it as a youth burden. How does this fit into the discussion? And if anybody is hoping to have a discussion, how does that... I
think there's a very major disconnect in the narrative, especially of stability, because a young person's appreciation of stability goes beyond security as we know it and peace for that matter. Because in any case, the stories of instability in Uganda do not even resonate with many of them, about 70% of that population segment. So stability to them means access to job opportunities if you're done with tertiary education. Stability means access to an efficient and effective healthcare system and all the other aspects that make social service delivery possible. So what that means then is, how do you engage the young people? But I think the young people are actually helpless because the system it's a disabling system. The system has disabled them to the extent that they almost can't engage constructively.
Yeah.
When they come to
How long will that be sustained? Because you can disable them for some time, but the realities of life will force them to think beyond that. Because the young people, Angelo talks about those in the 40s, looking at the next 20 years towards the 60s.
Will be
there are
retiring.
people in their 20s who are looking to their 30s, and responsibilities are beginning to come in, and they're beginning to think, where do we fit in this equation? And how do we...
The future, Ivan, is going to be one of two choices. Either you have got a social democratic state where power is reorganized, or you have a pure military state where law and order is maintained, but power remains.
Gentlemen, we need to end the show, but let me just come to Onapito to end the show. The major question, why you see three of Museveni's biggest challenges in the last election, in Amama Mbabazi, Kizza Besigye, and Benon Biraro, former colleagues in the bush, former colleagues in running government, they're disagreeing with him. They're saying, look, when we went to the bush, what you told us is not what you have delivered on. One, you promised you'd run a transitional government.
Chalia worked with him as well.
Chalia, briefly, yes, from FDC, then as a presidential advisor, and then moved back. Yes, you can add Chalia. You can add even Abed Bwanika and others. But what they're saying is, look, Mr. Museveni, what you promised is not what you have lived up to. One, you promised that in this enterprise of liberation, there would be different players. You have become the single player for a very long time. And therefore, your time as, even within the NRM itself, your time is up. And it's trying, can he replenish all of them? If you look at the results of the elections for army representatives in parliament, you see that significant shift of the people who were there and the people who are there now. How long, for how long will this be sustained?
Look, Charles, I tend to believe that the president has not actually changed. It's just that people keep on thinking that they understand him, and then when they realize they don't understand, they get frustrated. Look, I believe that, and I'm not very sorry for his friends who were with him in the bush. By the time Yoweri Museveni came to power, he was already largely absolute. You know, they had anointed him Zay in the bush, chairman of the High Command, chairman of a lot of other things, and his power was only legitimatized or made legal. So they don't have a lot of argument to say that he has changed.
How long can he sustain that?
Well, I think for as long as he has those who are supporting him.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Our time is out, and thank you very much to all our viewers. The discussion now is going to be about Kampala. Kampala has decided to resoundingly reject the NRM and the interventions. The NRM people are fighting over what good or bad Jennifer Museveni and her team have done. Fortunately, Frank Tumwebazi, the Minister for Kampala, came out in defense of the technical wing of Kampala, but a new order is being established because Arias Lukwago is coming back. All the councillors, those who were responsible for impeaching Lukwago, who were largely NRM, have all been sent out of the equation. Members of parliament are all now opposition.
All the division mayors?
All the division mayors are opposition or independent, and therefore a new system is being set up within Kampala. That discussion will continue. NTV will be hosting the Situation Room on Wednesday afternoon, and the discussion will be centered on Kampala City. How does it move forward given the new dynamics that have emerged there?
Including vendors coming back in full force.
Yes, vendors are trying to come back.
Utana doing its thing the way it was doing.
No, NRM people are trying to say, how do we placate the other section of Kampalans who are voters and have told us what we're doing is wrong. We had exited them from the political and economic calculations. But we'll be having that discussion. Thank you very much to especially the production team that stays up this late to deliver this show to you. And thank you very much to you gentlemen for making time for the show.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you very much to you all our viewers for joining us tonight and always. Have a good night.